we have an Indigenous Nations Working Together, an international panel. We have a succession of Indigenous speakers from other nations to talk about the United Nations Declaration as a tool to move our nations forward. Our first speaker is Myrna Cunningham Cain. She is Masitka from the community of Waspam, located on the banks of the Huanqui River in Nicaragua. She serves as the chair of the UN Permanent Forum of Indigenous Issues. She has been Secretary General of the Indigenous Inter-American Institute and has worked as a consultant to various multilateral, bilateral, governmental, and non-governmental organizations on a range of issues. Please welcome Myrna Cunningham Cain.
Good morning. I am very honored to be here this morning in this important meeting. I bring regards from the indigenous peoples from Nicaragua, the elders, and all of the leaders that are struggling very hard to build autonomy in our country, to exercise our individual and collective rights as indigenous peoples. The Declaration of Indigenous Peoples, adopted by the UN in 2007, is a very important step in the struggle of indigenous peoples all over the world. It took us more than almost 30 years to get the different governments to adopt the declaration. And at this point, there is no government that is opposing the declaration, but we still have a big gap between the recognition of our rights and the implementation of our rights at national and local and international levels. And some of the areas in which we are facing a lot of problems are related with the most, we would say, some of the most important rights. The right to self-determination, the right for full and effective participation in all of the decisions that are related with indigenous people's life, the right of land, territory, on the use of our natural resources. In the next, some of the steps that we're seeing that we should advance at the UN is for next year, for 2012, we are supporting a resolution of different states to hold a special session, a high plenary session at the UN for the 5th anniversary of the adoption of the declaration. And we expect that this high plenary session in which the governments should tell us how they are implementing the declaration will also serve as input to the other process that we are promoting at the UN level, that is the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples that will be held in 2014. As you are aware, last year, the General Assembly adopted a resolution to hold a high plenary session that will be known as the World Conference in 2014. And in the resolution, the General Assembly also called that the modalities and the way in which this conference should be organized should be with full and effective participation of indigenous peoples. But until now, we still haven't been able to discuss with the President of the General Assembly the modality of this meeting. And what we are proposing is that the modality should include high plenary sessions or preparatory sessions during 2012 and 2014, 2012 and 2013, that it should combine the way in which a high plenary session is organized with a world conference. So we should also consider regional preparatory meetings and a global preparatory meeting. Our brothers and sisters from the Samis from Norway have offered to sponsor this global preparatory meeting in 2013. But we really need different organizations from different parts of the world to give us recommendations on how you consider the best modality. In which way do you see that, for example, this National Congress could be participating in the preparation of this World Conference? We see this World Conference as a very important step because it will be the last year of the second decade of indigenous peoples at the UN. So it will give us an opportunity to discuss with member states what should be the next steps for the next 10 years in indigenous peoples' rights. We have to discuss also what are our expected outcomes from this World Conference. Do we expect another declaration? Would we like to see a plan of action coming out from this meeting? What is the outcome that we would like to see as indigenous people? So this is another activity in which we invite all of you to become involved, because if we can unite as indigenous peoples from the world for this World Conference, I think we can expect a good outcome. Our third priority in the next months is the participation of indigenous peoples in the World Summit that is called on Sustainable Development, that is called Rio +20. 20 years ago, indigenous peoples met in Rio de Janeiro and adopted the Carioca Declaration. The Carioca Declaration is a very important step because it served also for member states to adopt the Agenda 21, in which for the first time governments recognize our traditional knowledge in maintaining natural resources. Of course, 20 years after, a lot of things have not changed. And in a lot of our countries, things are not better. Things are worse. Indigenous peoples are facing the lack of respect for their view of development. They have imposed a model of development over our communities, and we have lost a lot of our resources, a lot of our knowledge. We are also facing, in several countries, eviction from our traditional territories. Our natural resources are being threatened. So 20 years after the conference in Rio, we see this as an important opportunity for two things. One is to go to Rio and present our assessment of what has happened in the last 20 years. But the second thing that we expect to happen in Rio is that we can go also as indigenous organizations, as indigenous peoples, and prove to the governments that we are advancing, that there are a lot of things that we are doing in our communities, in our organizations, that are based on our knowledge of development. So we had a preparatory meeting in Manaus, in Brazil, in August, and we are preparing to participate in June 2012 in this Rio Plus 20 conference, in which we are asking that demanding the governments to adopt resolutions on the right to food, the respect of our development proposal, and we are also demanding that there should be respect over our territorial rights and our natural resources. 2012 will be a very important year for the UN Permanent Forum. I saw that one of the priorities that you have is violence against indigenous women. Our session in January, the expert group meeting of the Permanent Forum team is violence against indigenous women and girls. And we expect during this meeting that we can adopt recommendations that we can take to the session of the Permanent Forum. In May, we will also be discussing, we will have our session of the Permanent Forum will have a half-day discussion on the doctrine of discovery. We also expect that the delegations that will go to the Permanent Forum will take recommendations on this important issue, the doctrine of discovery, not only to go back to the past and remember the things that created the structures that are still oppressing our communities, but especially to come up with recommendations that can help us go toward the future, to change these structures. And this is what all of our organizations are working on, things that can really change the condition of indigenous peoples. We will also have a half-day discussion on food sovereignty and the right to food. And we expect that the aspect of traditional food and all of the livelihood aspects that is related with food is something that you can also bring as recommendations to the Permanent Forum session. So I really want to congratulate you for this meeting, invite you to continue supporting the work that we're doing at the Permanent Forum, and invite you to continue in close relation with us at the Permanent Forum. If we can work together in all of these important issues, I'm sure we will continue changing the life of our communities. Because whatever that we do at the international level and at the national level, the only is important because we are trying to change the life of children, of men, women, elders in each one of the communities in which indigenous peoples live in all over the world. Thank you.
Terry, would you please indulge me? We're going to have a question and answer session after the other two panelists. So would you just be close to that so you'd be first? Okay. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Roger Jones, a member of the Sagamore-Anishinaabe First Nation in Ontario. He's been recognized many times for his outstanding achievements in law and policy. Roger's played a key role in several major achievements for Indigenous peoples in Canada, including the development of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Please help me welcome Roger Jones.
Ani. First of all, I would like to acknowledge the territory of the tribe upon who we are gathered here today for this meeting. Also like to acknowledge the drum which started off the meeting for us this morning, and acknowledge all of the elders in the gathering here today. President Keel and members of the executive, and of course you, the delegates. I bring greetings from National Chief Atleo and the executive of the Assembly of First Nations, and certainly appreciate the invitation to be here and to participate in this discussion regarding activities that we're engaged in relation to implementation of the Declaration, and to speak to how we might be able to work together to advance the implementation of the Declaration with respect to the issues you're dealing with, and of course the issues that Indigenous peoples deal with globally, which we know to be common among us. First of all, as you may know or may not know, Canada officially reversed its opposition to the Declaration on November 12th last year, so just less than a year ago. And just about a month before President Obama expressed support for the Declaration at the gathering of your leadership with the President in Washington last year. And so for the Assembly of First Nations, which is very much like the National Congress of American Indians, our work on the Declaration switched from endorsement to implementation, mostly. And I think the most important thing which we acknowledge in relation to implementation of the Declaration is that it is a two-way street. And you can only be able to implement what you know, and you need to know what your rights are in order to be able to take advantage of them and enjoy them. So for the Assembly of First Nations, our work on implementation has really been twofold. One is we have spent a lot of time educating our leadership and our community people about the Declaration as a priority, and of course we also spend a lot of time educating others about the Declaration as well. And that includes legislators, that includes the legal system, and that includes the general population. So we do basic things such as mass producing the Declaration in booklet form, in handy little booklet forms. We've also mass produced the Declaration by way of posters. We have conferences, workshops, we have webinars. This would be an example of the kinds of booklets that we've developed, and we've undergone a couple of prints of it already. So it's getting distribution, and more people are asking for it as well. So we've focused on that effort so that people can, in fact, be aware of the Declaration and then incorporate it into their own advocacy and in terms of their own work. The other major activity that we're involved in terms of advancing implementation of the Declaration is that in the work of the Assembly of First Nations, it is a major part of what we advance as standards by which the rights of our bands, our nations, have to be respected. So when we do submissions to legislative committees in Ottawa through the federal parliamentary process, we always include the language from the relevant article or section of the Declaration regarding the subject matter that we're speaking to. On a more general basis, one of the recent developments that has taken place regarding the relationship between First Nations and the federal government in Canada is the establishment of what's called a Joint First Nations and Crown Action Plan. The Crown refers to the federal government because we still have the concept of a crown in terms of the Canadian constitutional framework. So that's why the reference still exists with regard to the Crown. So this action plan, which is focused on 4 issues, which is education, economic development, treaty implementation, and land claims resolution, is intended to be informed by the historical relationship that has evolved over time between the Indigenous peoples in Canada and the federal government. And we make specific mention of the Declaration in the preamble to the action plan. And as an example, it says, Canada and First Nations have an enduring historic relationship based on mutual respect, friendship, and support. Under this government, which is the existing Conservative government, there has been a shift in Canada's relationship with First Nations, exemplified by the Minister's historic apology to former students of residential schools, which was done a few years ago. The creation of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which is currently conducting its work, and the launch of the Specific Claims Tribunal, which was a major development in Canada towards the resolution of land claims, and the endorsement of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So building on this relationship, Canada, as represented by the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development, and First Nations, as represented by the Assembly of First Nations, agreed to a joint action plan, and then it lists those items that I referred to as issues that we are going to jointly examine and hopefully come up with a plan that will advance the rights and interests of our Indigenous peoples across the country. We in fact do continue the advocacy work because we believe that provincial governments, which are like your state governments, also need to endorse the Declaration so that their policies, their negotiations can be informed by the standards as set out in the Declaration. I think the most obvious example of where our leadership and where our grassroots people have embraced the Declaration is with regard to Article 19 of the Declaration, which speaks to free, prior, and informed consent. In Canadian law, the standard that exists is something called consultation and accommodation. the courts have established that standard as what is required on the part of the Crown or the federal and provincial governments when it comes to dealing with First Nations rights and interests on their territories. And the courts have said that consultation and accommodation is a spectrum. It can be mere notice all the way to the requirement for consent on the part of the people that are going to be affected. Now, First Nations leadership and First Nations people in Canada have said, well, the new standard is free, prior, and informed consent, and we're not going to settle for mere notice, or that the government has sent a letter to our community and asked what we think about this development or that development. They are in fact insisting on their consent being obtained before decisions, policy making, or development takes place. So that is where we believe the most impact has been felt. I'll just speak very quickly about where I think our cooperation can be directed at. Last week in Australia, the heads of state of the Commonwealth, which still exists, Canada is a member of the Commonwealth, as well as countries such as Australia and New Zealand. The heads of the Commonwealth met, and the Prime Minister of Canada made an announcement about the establishment of what he calls the Canadian International Institute for Extractive Industries and Development. And as far as we're concerned as First Nations peoples in Canada, Canada has much to learn about best practices in managing and developing resources, and that learning has to come from us before it starts exporting bad practices in relation to how to deal with development of natural resources in those territories where First Nations have rights and interests. So that is something which obviously should be a concern for everyone globally, insofar as Indigenous people's rights are concerned. Now, one of the things which took place in June of this year was a major summit on mining and energy development, and that summit was held in Niagara Falls, Canada, and it was a summit which was co-hosted by the Assembly of First Nations and by the National Congress of American Indians, and President Keel and Jackie Johnson co-chaired the conference together with National Chief Atleo and Alphonse Bird, one of our leaders in Canada. And one of the outcomes of that particular conference was the idea of creating a virtual institute, much like what the Prime Minister is speaking about in establishing a center of excellence. We determined that we would establish this virtual institute, which would operate across borders, and it would be intended to assist Indigenous people with capacity building and dealing with the extractive industry, and also with governments who often are the ones that are permitting, licensing, and providing the authorization for development to proceed. So we believe that a development such as that and the announcement made last week are obviously connected, and that in working together through the NCAI and AFN, and of course with our brothers and sisters elsewhere, we should in fact take the initiative to help Canada in its work in terms of identifying what those best practices should be in dealing with our rights and our interests in our territories before development proceeds. Just a couple of points that I want to mention in terms of collaboration. One of the issues which is still in development is a study which was commissioned by the UN a few years ago on treaties. And there's been 2 seminars with regard to how to implement the recommendations from the treaty study. And there's a 3rd seminar which is upcoming, which potentially will be hosted by the Maori in New Zealand. But one of the things that often matters in terms of whether or not a seminar such as this proceeds is whether or not the UN is prepared to dedicate resources to it. And I think that's where our collective voices need to be directed, is to encourage the UN to ensure that resources are put forth that will enable us to come together and discuss issues of common concern. Of course, we're very pleased that the seminar regarding violence against Indigenous women and girls is taking place in January, and Assembly of First Nations looks forward to participating in that session and working as collaboratively as possible with others, including the National Congress, regarding that issue. And so there are obviously many things that we can work on together, and those are just a couple of examples. So I'll leave it at that for now, and thank you for your attention. Miigwech.
Thank you. Thank you. Marc Solomon is of Ngātahu and Ngāti Kuri descent from Kakura on the east coast of New Zealand's South Island. He is the elected Kawakiri chair of Te Runango Unagi Tahu, a position he has held since 1998. Marc has represented his Kura Runanga since 1988 and has contributed to his community in many capacities. Please welcome Marc Solomon.
E aku nui, e aku rahi, e aku whakateitei ki ngā whenua, nei rā aura ki maunga e mihi ana, ki ngā kia ngā o whenua nui nei. Kia koutou, kai aku rangatira, ngā kai whakapā rurui ahau, i ai wai tapu. Nei au e noho whakaiti nei, ko te tai o whā, o puku aroha, o whakamanoa hoki ki kore e heke i te timu o te wai. To you, my esteemed elders, leaders and chiefs, and to you, the paramount luminaries of this land, the tallest peak of my homeland, Aoraki, greets you in the lofty peaks in this great land of yours. To you, my noble hosts, who accord me, a stranger to your lands, such generosity and hospitality, I humbly thank you. The tide of gratitude, of great affection, of respect will never recede despite ebbing currents. We here, with our Indigenous relations globally, are the architects of our future. Our success in leading the regeneration of our identities and communities, the reclamation of the potential of our people to create our future, our way, and in our own image. Our journey of regeneration is and will be intergenerational and driven by a powerful vision. Our people over many generations have pursued not only justice and equality, but the driving vision of restoring our place in our ancestral homelands, the platform to create our future, our way. I am humbled to be here sharing in this convention with leaders of nations, journeying together and creating the future for our communities and our collective future as Indigenous peoples. Your reclamation of your future is a journey we share in. Despite being on the other side of the world, we are metaphorically standing shoulder to shoulder with you, seeking the same outcomes, experiencing the same challenges, and being driven by a common vision. For my people, the tribe of Ngāi Tahu, our journey has been carried over 7 generations seeking justice for the fraudulent taking of our ancestral territories. Over 7 generations we petitioned, we litigated, we lobbied, we negotiated. In 1997, the government acknowledged that it had acted unconscionably toward my ancestors, and we agreed a package of redress. That redress is the endowment that must form a perpetual base to fund a limitless future for every generation of Ngāi Tahu to come. We are now 13 years into our journey of being in charge of creating our future. 13 years into learning how to chart our own course for our intergenerational development as a people. In this context, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is both an enormous achievement and a marginal note in our intergenerational journey. The Declaration is significant to my people because it is a product of Indigenous peoples working together to articulate uniquely Indigenous standards. I would like to acknowledge all our relations who strove for the Declaration. We are the ears of their vision, dedication, and for many, their lives' work. My relations, Iri Hapati Murchie and Caroline Bull, were 2 of the many Māori who work shoulder to shoulder with Indigenous peoples globally to produce the Declaration. I am proud of the Declaration because I can see our realities and aspirations reflected in it. I can hear our people as they negotiated the text, bringing Indigenous knowledge and values into the United Nations system. Symbolically and practically, the Declaration contributes to our future by articulating the base conditions for the Indigenous spirit and future to flourish. The Declaration's strength, in my view, is that it codifies our visions. The Declaration describes and protects the intergenerational visions that have carried our identity since time immemorial. And by doing so, the Declaration puts Indigenous peoples at the centre. Ultimately, I believe restoring the rights the Declaration records and realising the vision of the Declaration is our responsibility. We all know too well that our rights can be taken away in an instant, but that it takes many lifetimes to restore rights, to reclaim the right and ability to live as Indigenous peoples. That process of restoration, reclamation and regeneration, that is our responsibility. That does not mean the 4 states that we live within, the US, Canada, Australia and New Zealand, who stubbornly rejected the Declaration until recently, have less responsibilities. In my opinion, the role of government is secondary to our own. Government should not trample on rights, and government should establish fair foundations for Indigenous peoples to be uniquely Indigenous. But it is our responsibility to realise the rights the Declaration articulates, because that is our purpose for being. We will encourage the government to help us and to not obstruct our vision, but ultimately realising the Declaration is simply honouring the visions of our ancestors, and that is solely our responsibility. I think it is critical that we remember that rights are about enabling lived experiences. The right to language only has meaning when we live and speak our language. The right to our relationships with our ancestral landscape only has meaning as long as we live in our way with our ancestral landscape. The lived experience that rights are meant to protect, only we can live those experiences, only we can live as Indigenous people. Only we can self-define our development journey. For Ngāi Tahu, we are actively and strategically investing in realising the Declaration as an articulation of enduring tribal visions. The settlement we negotiated with the government in 1998 was 170 million. 170 million is 2%, or just less than 2% of the actual loss from the fraudulent taking of our land. We accepted 170 not because it was fair, but because it was sufficient to re-establish the economic base for our tribe. it was significant for our tribe to reclaim and drive our self-defined development journey. Over 13 years, we have grown that $170 million to $666 million net. That growth is pleasing and gives me great confidence in having a solid economic base for our intergenerational future. What I am proud of, however, is that in 13 years, we have distributed more than the total of our settlement to our people, to our communities, and to our future. Since 1998, we have invested $227.9 million of our own dollars in tribal development. That $227.9 million represents our self-determination. We have chosen when, how, and why to invest in particular aspects of our identity and future. Every year, we invest over $1 million in cultural revitalisation. We reach over 400 young people through educational grants for children through to tertiary students. We invest over $1 million in environmental restoration across our ancestral territories. We reach 16,000 tribal members through a match savings program to build their financial base and contribute to their quality of life. And we invest around $4.3 million in building our 18 regional communities and their economies per annum. These investments matter to me because it is Ngāi Tahu being responsible for the future we are creating. Ngāi Tahu are creating a legacy for future generations to inherit and innovate from. Each of these investments year on year builds the stepping stones towards the rights codified in the Declaration. Each young person that plants a tree in one of our environmental restoration projects learns some of our language, learns some of our histories, lives our values and feels a sense of belonging in our communities. The experience of that young person contribute to the realisation of Articles 9, 11, 12, 13, 14, 20, 25, 29, 31, 32 and 33 of the Declaration. This type of quiet achievement generates incremental change and cumulatively builds the momentum behind our journey of responsibility for self-reclamation and self-realisation. Ngāi Tahu engages with the government on this basis. We present ourselves as having unique resources, talents and capabilities to contribute. We present ourselves as being responsible for our future and contributing to the national good. We present ourselves as wanting to partner with the government. We are not supplicants seeking government benevolence. We are in charge of ourselves and our future. We are creating a new generation of partnership with the government that is marked by shared responsibility for realising shared outcomes, and I believe we have been successful. Our most recent success is achieving a statutory partner status with the government. In the context of recovering from an earthquake that devastated a city within my tribal area, the government created a new department responsible for leading the city's recovery. Ngāi Tahu, after supporting 10,000 homes through the crisis phase, negotiated with the government on ways to recognise our standing as Indigenous peoples and our contribution to the wider community in which we live. The outcome was in the creation of the recovery strategies and plans. Ngāi Tahu has the same status as central and local government. It is recognised in statute that we are equal contributing partners, a status that we have sought to reclaim for over 150 years. But of course, this stage of the journey has only just begun, and we have ambitious visions for the future we are creating. The successes of today are simply stepping stones for the greater ambitions of tomorrow. And this long journey is a collective one, just as the Declaration is a product of Indigenous cooperation and partnership. I believe our patient revolution will be enriched and enhanced through collaboration with our Indigenous relations. In New Zealand, our rights recognition movements of the 1960s, 70s and 80s built on the 1972 Great Land March here. The landmark decisions of our courts in the 1980s and 1990s borrowed liberally from the progressive decisions of Canadian courts. More importantly, Our settlement with the government was agreed at the same time as the Nisga'a Treaty. We have studied your approaches to sovereignty, governance and economic development. Many peoples have studied our model for language regeneration. We each are the awakening sectors of our national economies. We are each the waking giants of the sustainable prosperity. We are each led by the visions and values of our ancestors, and in doing so, challenged to revolutionise how sustainable prosperity is achieved. For Ngāi Tahu, we are still learning how to be a uniquely Indigenous business. Our businesses are successful, and the assets we develop are our ancestral resources. But we are on the journey to fully integrate our Indigenous values into how we do business. We are also learning how to grow a truly intergenerational business in a global market defined by short-term thinking. Our people are brimming with ambitious, bold and innovative ideas to help fuel our learning and development journeys. Equally, our people are disproportionately represented in all negative social indices in the same ways, despite our unique histories. Our tribal authorities represented here today are each responsible for changing the world. We each have achieved some remarkable successes and equally face formidable and solemn challenges to remedy the situation for all of our peoples. My aspiration for meeting with you, it is that we turn our focus from articulating the rights we ought to enjoy to helping each other realise the meaning of those rights for our people. In New Zealand, iwi have come together through the Iwi Chairs and Iwi Leaders Forum, an organisation similar to the National Congress of American Indians, but much younger. Iwi, or tribes from across the country, have come together to share our experiences and development initiatives and also to collectively engage with government. Over the last 6 years, the Iwi Chairs Forum has formed a number of working groups to directly engage with ministers on matters of national importance, and through regular reporting to all tribes, form shared positions across tribes on pathways forward. I believe this form of collaboration has increased our ability to protect our rights with the government, to increasingly partner with government and ensure that all iwi have a voice in the halls of government. We are now increasingly seeking to build relationships and to actively collaborate with our Indigenous relations globally. Whether this is in the form of co-investing together or learning from your tribal development programs, or simply celebrating our unique cultural inheritances together. The relationships and partnerships that we can forge amongst Indigenous peoples globally are and will be irreplaceable catalysts in achieving the spirit of the declaration and vision of our ancestors. My appreciation to the National Congress of American Indians and you all for inviting me to attend and address this important event and contribute to the building of these collaborative opportunities. In conclusion, I offer a proverb that we often use at home. Naku te raudo, no te raudo, ka ora ai te iwi. With your basket and my basket, the people will live. Kia ora tātou.